Welcome viewers, I am Dr. Tarang Kapoor and we are discussing care ethics, and we are going to discuss from where we left in the last lecture. What are the significant challenges posed in terms of evaluation of feminist ethics? Is there a gender difference in morality? That's the question we are going to thrust on in this lecture. First question is this contention true that women and men exhibit a different type of moral perspective and moral reasoning? So in the last lecture we were discussing how there are contrasting virtues, and we saw this from the table which is presented by Barbara McNannon and her co-author in the book, in terms of these binaries which are present. So do we really have this contrasting moral perspective and moral reasoning present in male and female? Is it an empirical fact that men and women manifest a different type of moral reasoning? We answer this question, we need to explore whether there is a difference between the moral language and logic of males and females. Gilligan's research finds such variation in moral reasoning among both men and women. According to these findings, while both men and women sometimes think in terms of justice perspective, few men think in terms of a care perspective. Being able to take one perspective rather than the other, she wrote, is much like being able to see the following well-known line drawing figure as a rabbit or a duck. One's perspective affects how one sees the figure, and we are going to see this figure. From which perspective we are approaching a particular subject matter. This is the duck-rabbit illusion shown by Wittgenstein in his very famous work, Philosophical Investigations. And there are, according to this, there are two ways of seeing a particular picture, a particular perspective, which shows that this particular picture here in front of us can be seen at one point as a rabbit, and on the other point it can be seen as a duck. So it actually just is a matter of from what point of view we are approaching a particular subject matter. So women are able to see the same moral reasoning in the case of the same moral reasoning from the point of view of care, and men are able, when they are arguing for the same the same issue, they are arguing in moral reasoning, they are seeing it from as a rabbit. And this can be vice versa. So let us explain our point here. With regard to ethics, if one has a justice perspective, one will see that the self as moral agent stands as the figure against the ground of social relationships, judging the conflicting claims of self and others against the standard of equality or equal respect. If one has a care perspective, then one will see that relationship becomes the figure defining self and others. So in the case of a care perspective, when we approach our issue from the point of view of care perspective, we see that we are approaching the entire subject matter from the interconnectedness between self and the other. On the other hand, when we are approaching a particular issue from the justice perspective, we focus on impartiality, fairness, and whole assertion of rights, among others. Within the context of relationship, the self as a moral agent perceives and responds to the perception of need. Gilligan, in moral orientation and moral development, shows us this, that when we are talking about what are needs, then we are always talking in terms of interdependence on one on the other. In these more recent studies, Gilligan used educationally advanced North American adolescents and adults and found that 2/3 had one or the other orientation as their primary focus. So either they were focusing on justice as their orientation or on care as their orientation. Still, she found 6 differences in the results. let us delve more on this. With one exception, all of them who have focused on justice. The women divided with roughly 1/3 focusing on justice and 1/3 on care. The other third had a hybrid approach. In this study, women did not always have the care perspective as their focus, but without the women in the study, the care focus would have been almost absent. So it was more and more women who were inclined towards the care perspective. There are other theorists who are critical of the data, like Catherine Greeno, Eleanor Maccoby, believe that any difference between men and women morality, men's and women's morality, can be accounted for by social status and experience rather than gender. So the issue of moral judgment making or moral reasoning has not much to do with which gender you belong to, but it also has to do a lot with the social status and the kind of experiences you have, the other identities which formulate your being. Using other studies, they point out, like these two philosophers, the critiques of Gilligan, have pointed out that in any cases, those who exhibit so-called feminine morality have been housewives and women who lack higher education. They found that career women showed types of moral reasoning similar to those of men. The question of whether women do exhibit a unique type of moral language and logic will need to be decided by those who study the empirical data. And of course, you can examine your own experiences to see whether the males and females you know seem to reason differently when discussing moral issues. So it depends on which phase of life you are, if you are more of a homemaker or you are a professional person. Many other kinds of identities of which you are part of will go a long way in deciding whether you will side with the justice perspective or with the care perspective. So it is not entirely a matter of which gender you belong to. The second question, which is more pertinent, is if this fact is true, then how are we to explain it? Like, what is the fact we started with? That there is a male ethics and there is a female ethics. Now, how are we going to explain if this is true? What may be the source or cause of this difference between male and female? Barbara McNennan and Andrew Fiala discuss at least 3 distinct types of explanations which address a possible difference between masculine and feminine morality. So, on the one hand, there is feminine, and on the other, masculine, and on the other hand, feminine morality, and why, if there at all is a difference between the them, what will be the causes of them. The first difference is in the psychosexual development of the two sexes. For instance, according to Freudian account of the effect of psychosexual development, Freud, the psychologist we just referred to in the last lecture, the psychosexual development on male and female moral thinking, males and females have different concepts of the self and their gender identities. This concept is influenced by their development in relation to their mothers and fathers. So how they develop these kinds of gender identities and have different concepts of their self, and how they understand gender, being born as a male or a female, and with their relation, also this has a bearing on their relation with their mother and father respectively. So that psychosexual relationship goes a long way in defining how masculine and how the feminine do moral reasoning later in their life. Now, the other key difference is the biological difference. The Caroline Whitebeck locates the source of difference in masculine and feminine morality in women's and men's biology. That is in the differences in their reproductive capacities and the experiences herewith. So their bodies and their reproduction, what kind of experiences they have in terms of their embodied self. In pregnancy, labor and childbirth, women experience certain feelings of dependency on the other and certain feelings of contingency, interrelatedness. They do not have full control over their bodies. Their experience of dependency and pain, and because of their feelings during their time, they can sympathize more clearly and more readily with the infant on the child's or the child who is born thereafter, with the feeling of that child and the feeling of helplessness, dependency, and thereby able to support the child. Because they have themselves gone through this entire gamut of requirements when they are pregnant and when they are dealing with their body. That's why they are able to support that kind of dependency. So this is clearly different from a male's biological requirements and biological structure. Number 3, the third kind of difference is some philosophers have offered a social, cultural and educational explanation to this. So there was first was psychosexual, the other second was biological, and the third is the social, cultural and educational differentiation. Although naturalistic explanation maintains that there is more instinctive orientation towards nurturance in women, that is ultimately a matter of biology and physiology. However, their culture and socialization matters. Girls and women are taught to exhibit nurturing behaviors. So there is a socialization and culturalization which happens by a culture. So this is also giving us a lead into the formulation of gender as an identity. So that expects them to be nurturers and caregivers, this culturalization. Mothering is not only a biological phenomena, but also it's a social and cultural responsibility. Although some women bear children, it is not necessary that they rear these children. Still, because they so give birth to and nurse infants, women have generally come to be the primary child rearers. So they become child rearers. And it has a lot to do with the social and the cultural bearing of a society. So women's morality arises from elements of maternal practice. Philosopher Sarah Ruddick believes that maternal practice results in maternal thinking, which is the vocabulary and logic of connections that arises from women acting in response to demands of their children. So what you practice is what you start thinking. So when you are demanded a particular kind of requirements by your children, you end up providing those, and when you end up providing those, you end up meeting those demands and you start thinking in those interrelated terms. Maternal thinking is purposeful way of thinking and acting rather than being just a kind of feeling or thought. It is actually an acting. An acting in the sense you actually do action. Okay, so it is thought in action. It finds ways to preserve, develop and promote one's children. In fact, children are extremely vulnerable and will not survive if they do not have the basics of food, clothing, shelter and other necessities. According to Ruddick, particular virtues like humility, cheerfulness, combined with realism and love, are required by a mother to satisfy needs of her children. So a woman, when she becomes a mother, she is playing this a dialectical game, as to speak. She is going back and forth with her learnings, whatever she has learned, and then she is applying those learnings in terms of the requirements which are raised by her children. So mothers ought to guard against negative feelings like hopelessness, possessiveness, and they need to be more compassionate, forthcoming, positive, to take care of the child. The reason is that they spend much of their lives mothering, that their morality has developed in consistency with their experiences. All our cultural norms celebrate the value of care and also reinforce this value. We praise caregiving and caregiving nature so much so that at times, negatively speaking, we praise sacrificing nature, and we celebrate mothering or taking care in the positive sense, while wondering about femininity of women who do not exemplify maternal virtues. That will be a question here, that what do we say for women who do not have the showcase at least these maternal virtues. So that's why it becomes a question. Maternal morality stresses relationships and virtues that are necessary for mothering. Children need help in growing morally, physically, socially, emotionally. Since women spend most of their lives mothering, most of their lives taking care, rearing the child, that they develop a morality consistent with this experience. The cultural norms reinforce the value of care and nurturance for women. We celebrate mothering and praise care-giving women. Maternal morality stresses relationships and virtues that are necessary for nurturing. So what we want is what we get. Just because men and some women do not give birth does not mean that they cannot be parents and develop the outlook which is required for this practice. So, it is not so much in terms of biological structure. Even if a woman cannot give birth, or a man can, of course, biologically cannot give birth, that does not make them, less inclined towards nurturing or caring. We can see the debate from this point of view as well, that it is clear from this analysis that there is enough argument to suggest that it's a social phenomenon. Caring, nurturing, this is part of a cultural milieu. It's a social phenomena. It's an ongoing process. That maternal practice has been principally women's work is a social construct. And if the society were to think about this whole debate differently, then it will definitely, the share will also be appreciated and assimilated by males. Now we have to evaluate gender-specific approaches to morality. We have been doing that for a while, but let us take some more perspectives. Many times it is criticized that ethics of care, in as much as it is focused on practical relations, is a lower-level morality. In the defense of ethics of care, we may argue that ethics of care provides a better moral orientation. It's not a lower level morality only because it is, contested vis-a-vis the more authoritarian and the more established normative order. Does not mean that it is weak in any way. For instance, we can defend our case instead of judging wars in terms of whether the overall benefit outweighs the cost that we may incur. We do well to think about particular people who are involved. For instance, every soldier is someone's daughter, son, sister, brother, and mother or father. At times we may believe that the two orientations are complementary. So why we do not want war? We do not want war because we are looking at the interconnections of people with people. So people who are fighting the war are someone's daughter and or someone's son, someone's father, and we are not trying to say that war should not be our aim purely because of the utilitarian or contractual reasons. We are against war. We are for peace and non-violence because we are interconnected beings. That's one way, and a very pertinent and important way of looking at the subject matter. Like, we switch the picture from duck, we start looking at the picture from a different aspect, which is we start looking at the same picture, which at one point was looking as a duck, now it is looking to us as a rabbit, and the aspect actually undergoes a change. So perhaps justice orientation is the minimum morality, minimum requirement for morality. We could then build on this minimum and then talk about justice along with care. Another way can be that the justice orientation is the more basic one, and justice concerns could then be brought in to determine how best we can care, how best can we care, and we can be just while we are caring. So we can assimilate and accommodate both the perspectives. Now, would it be possible for both men and women to develop both set of virtues? This is also another question which care ethics is faced with. If these virtues are described in a positive way, would they not be traits which all people should strive to possess, irrespective of whether they are male or female? Yes, answer looks like yes. These traits are different aspects of human personality rather than being belonging to us only because we are born male or female. They should be seen as human virtues rather, and human perspectives. And ethics of fidelity, care, sympathy would be just as important as for human flourishing as the ethics of duty, justice, rights, and acting on principles. While there would be certain moral virtues that all people should develop, other psychological traits vary according to our temperament and choices. Individuals would be free to manifest according to their own personalities. Any combination of positive moral characters, these sets of characteristics and virtues would synthesize both stereotypical masculine ones and feminine traits. Now let us go for an evaluation of ethics of care. Are all aspects of ethics of care good? That's the question. So remember, we just discussed that it looks like a weak version of an ethical theory vis-a-vis established normative ethical theories. Now, care ethics seems to be based on relations between unequal people. The dependency in the relations goes one way, One party does all the giving, all the caring, while other does all the receiving. Is that the case? That one is always nurturing and the other person is always receiving the benefit. This may, as an end result, reinforce and promote a one-sided morality. That's the difficulty of self-sacrifice or subjugation in some instances. It may reinforce the view that women ought to be the ones who sacrifice, who undergo pain, help and support others, and give up their own chiefly they sacrifice for children and men. Care ethics tends to rest upon these stereotypes about males and female behavior at times, which tend to reinforce male dominance in a different way. If we think that men are impartial while women are not, that may lead us to think twice about assigning women to positions of authority where impartiality is required. So, this whole idea of the binary we did in the table, that men are impartial, women are more caring and they have more on interrelatedness, so they are partial. This throws up a new question, entirely new question to the whole debate. Also, the hard distinction between genders is very problematic. Furthermore, these supposed differences may only be cultural differences. This might be a cultural role that in some cultures women are mere caring and men are impartial. This might be true for not true for different other cultures, like in African cultures, Asian cultures, both men and women have caring behaviors. There are very strong elements of care thinking in both Confucian culture and even Buddhist thought, and even in Hindu thought. This shows that ethics of care can and should be regarded as potential overall human morality rather than as something just about, at most, only relevant to women. So when we are talking about ethics of care, we have to not narrow it down and only pin it down to the female or the feminine. We have to think about the larger potential in terms of the overall human morality. However, it is argued that care does not come naturally to women. And not all women are good mothers or nurturers. We were just touching on this point a while back, that many times a woman might not want to become a mother. She might not be engaged in nurturing in the sense that she has other professional commitments. So there are critics who have questioned this line of thought, that it is they believe that essential argument and arguing essentially from the point of view of biological essentialism and saying that all women ought to be nurturers will not be the right way to approach this matter. Moreover, even men exhibit these characters, and some cultures emphasize care as primary value for both men and women. Supporters of ethics of care may reply that their main concern is not the gender issue as much as the need to advance care in opposition to other traditional virtues, and that is the most relevant, and I must say right way of approaching the subject matter. That instead of supplementing the virtues of impartiality, universality among others, we are traditional virtues, we are focusing more on the virtue of care. In addition, many critics of care ethics contend that the promotion of so-called feminine traits may not be to benefit women and may reinforce women's subservient positions in the society. Defenders of care ethics might respond, it is not that such feminine virtues like obedience, self-sacrifice, silence and service that define an ethics of care. In fact, ethics of care is more empowering and a more positive kind of a virtue. It is not just, serving in terms of somebody forcing you to serve or forcing you to pay obedience to their whims and fancies. It is more of an empowering. I can take example of the Gandhian understanding of non-violence. When Gandhi talks about non-violence, he talks about it as a soul force, some positive coming from within. So care can also be articulated in those terms rather than taking it in a negative connotation. Rather, such an ethics tells us from what perspective we are to judge morally, namely from the perspective of specific persons in relation to each other, susceptible to particular harms and benefits. Can an ethics of care free itself from negative associations of traditional feminist morality? Can feminist ethics support an ethics of care while also seeking to promote women's equality? It is clear at least that women cannot be restricted to traditionally subservient roles anymore if they are to be treated equally and fairly in both public and private realms. So the traditional roles might not be the outcome. Even if we go ahead with care ethics, it's not necessary that we are going to be regressing in a traditional kind of understanding of these roles. What these discussions have also suggested is that we can no longer maintain that one ethics exists at home and another, that is the private realm, and another ethics at work or the public realm. The one at home is that of care and relationships, and the one that is in the public is the justice and fairness, impartiality based ethics. Elements of altruism and concern for particular concrete individuals have a place in political as well as domestic spheres. Feminists have famously said that the personal is political. What they mean when they say that what happens in the personal life, and I quote, is particularly in relations between the sexes, is not immune from the dynamic of power, which has typically been seen as distinguishing feature of the political. However, while care ethics describes as an ideal context for ethical decision making, it does not tell us how we are going to make decisions in a concrete situation. Does not tell or does not explore itself, say that constituents benefit from the decisions made or are harmed. It gives no rule for what we are to do in cases of conflict of interest. So there are certain lacunas there. We need to be mindful of them. Supporters of care ethics may respond that by setting the context of the ethical decision making, and ethics of care has already done something more valuable, and for it thus provides a balance to otherwise one-sided traditional approaches which are impersonalized and universal in nature. Perhaps this is a valuable minimum achievement that it sets up the context. Or perhaps care ethics, with its emphasis on human connectedness, has an even more central role to play in our today's ethical and political discussions. Feminism and ethics of care remain important focal points of any moral theory. Caring approach to ethics helps relatedness figure into ethics, and I will again quote Noddings. She says, and I quote, "The caring attitude which expresses our earliest memories of being cared for and our growing store of memories of both caring and being cared for is universally accessible," unquote. So she brings in a kind of universal element to the ethics of care. Let us conclude by what Gilligan said in a different voice. And I quote, "What we need now is a marriage of the old male and the newly articulate female insights," unquote.